I'm Edd China, and this is my garage, and we're going to talk about my 5 favourite tools and my book, which you should buy immediately. Now, back in the day, I used to do a lot of designing with 2D CAD, which is quite complicated, thinking in 3D but designing in 2D. So I now use SolidWorks, which is 3D CAD, but I can do some really groovy stuff with my lovely new tool, which is a Creaform. Now, this is a very groovy thing. It's a 3D scanner. Basically, you're kind of painting with light. So I literally just push the button, and you can see the lasers are coming out. And it uses the little targets to work out where it is in space. And I can literally now just scan, just get a little bit the right distance away, just by wiping over a target with all the little targets on. We'll even do the goggles, hopefully, as we're there. There's other versions where you can do whole planes or cars. In fact, you could scan an entire car in about 4 hours. And you can even open and close all the doors because the dots will let the machine know where it is. And it can even manage shiny surfaces like glass and chrome as well. Well, now on my other desk, we have all kinds of electrical stuff, including my C-Tech charger. I would not be without these things. These things are amazing. Got lots of different versions of them for different applications. As you can see, I am charging a battery from a boat as we speak, which is rather groovy. But also, it's all about electrical stuff. So I'm now getting into a world where I'm electrifying ice cream vans, classic cars, all that kind of stuff. So I actually go into, I'm going to stray a little bit. So it's not just one tool, it's not just an electric charger, it's actually other bits as well. I've got this wonderful cutting machine, and this is just fantastic. We had a very rude name for this in America because it was just so good. But I'm just going to start a little tiny bit. So you just basically get that where you want it to go. You've got these really, really long leads. Of course, it's fiberglass, so it doesn't actually fry you. Oh, you can just, that's so good. You have no idea how satisfying that is. I'm going to do one more, just because the camera probably wants to see it, but that means I get to do it again. You ready? Oh, that's good. It's really, really good. And it gives you a nice clean end as well, which is really what it's all about. So I now have all these high voltage tools, which basically stop you from electrifying yourself, or rather electrocuting yourself, because electricity can absolutely kill. And I've got all kinds of stuff. I've got little sockets and things. So as you can see, there's no metal bare except for right at the very, very end. And once you put your socket on the end of that, it's actually going to short the electricity from whatever you're working on up to you, which is vitally important, because unfortunately with electric cars, the downside is the electricity. Anything over about 60 volts will actually kill you. So whether it's 150 or 400 volts, it's basically death waiting to happen. You have to be very safe and very, very careful, and you have to use the right tools. So hopefully if you're thinking about converting a car, go for a nice set of these special high voltage tools. Now, my first ever favourite tool is probably my first ever tool that I bought, which is a 13mm spanner with a very funky little end. So you can get to the little difficult bits, particularly on a Volkswagen Beetle. And in fact, it's actually when you're trying to get around the back of the carburettor to unbolt that last bolt, that is what you need. And I learnt the hard way. Basically, my first car was a Volkswagen. It's metric. My dad and my mother worked on Minis, and they were not metric. They're imperial. So of course, all the tools that were lying around, there weren't very many of them, were all imperial, which meant I actually ruined my knuckles quite badly for the first couple of weeks. And so I thought, you know what, I need to get the right tool. And that 13mm spanner was it. That was the one. But my second first favourite tool, I don't know if it makes any sense at all, actually was this. It's a welding mask. It's solar powered, so essentially it uses the arc of the weld itself, and there's little solar cells in here to then darken the glass so you can weld without burning your eyes out, which is really, really good because it really hurts if you get arc eye. Now, actually, when I did the screen test for Wheeler Dealers, I was asked to talk about my favourite tool, and at the time I happened to have this in the back of the car, and as I turned up quite randomly, because I nearly didn't bother going, I just happened to have a job in the right area, I thought, what not, I'll just talk about this. And really, it wasn't that complicated. I just told you, it's solar powered and it's brilliant. It means welding is a lot easier. I haven't got to whiz up the mask up and down or get this kind of nodding thing going when you're trying to flick it back down again. So it's a very, very useful tool indeed. And in fact, when I was playing around with welding, see, this might look a bit strange, but this is actually the wheel off my shopping trolley. It's 3.5 meters high, out of stainless steel, and it kind of leads us on to another tool, if you like, in my collection of tools. It must be about 13 by now. The press to guillotine these pieces off in the first place, and then to fold it. It was having to work so hard. We were about half a mile away, and we can actually feel the ground vibrate every time the press went, or the guillotine cut through the metal, which is pretty awesome. So that's how it kind of got its name, Trolleysaurus Rex, like T-Rex, of course, is coming. So that's quite groovy. I'm now actually working on a new version of the trolley. So originally it was electric, but it wasn't a very, very powerful motor, so it wasn't great going over speed bumps. I then went to hydraulic drive, which is what this is, with a motorbike engine to actually run all that. And it was very messy and very noisy. So I'm now going back to a much more sporty electric motor because they're now available. And so hopefully, maybe this year, maybe next year or the year after, I will get our giant shopping trolley back on the road and amaze everybody. It'll be wonderful. Now, another favourite tool, I don't know how many we're up to now, it's clearly way more than 5, is actually not entirely mine. It's a water jet cutter. Now, obviously with the shopping trolley, we used lasers and other things and sort of presses and things to get it going and a lot of machining, but this is from my electric ice cream van. Now, you can see it's a very pretty shape because I could draw it in CAD, which is very easy to do. I did some scanning first, worked out where my holes had to be, and then I sort of started drawing other bits and pieces around it. Now, this is actually the bit that joins the electric motor to the gearbox. You can see that's the back of where the gearbox bell housing would be attached to, and there's loads of these because I've made a kind of a little like a mini gearbox, because inside this little gap we've got like a vacuum generator, a little vacuum pump that just goes in there, and there's a few other bits and pieces depending on what bit we're working on that goes all the way from this bit. There's about 10 of these that all go together. But what's really, really awesome is, like back in the day, obviously you'd have to use like a hacksaw and a file or whatever to get a shape you wanted. And then you could use plasma cutters, and the problem with plasma cutter is actually with the plasma, it's like welding badly in a way. You use the arc of some high voltage sort of arc to actually then blow a hole in your metal, and you end up with lots of slag or these little bits of kind of used metal, if you like, around the edges. That all had to be cleaned off, so it's a bit messy. Then we got laser cutting, which is great, so it's much more defined. That used to harden the edges, and now we have water jet cutting. So actually, this was cut out of aluminium that's about 10 mil thick, using a jet of water with some little grains of grit inside. And you can see that the lines are really, really precise. It's really gentle, but you can cut wood, you can cut glass, you can cut fabric. It's an amazing technology. And coupled with all this 3D design, so I can scan something in, I can modify it in SolidWorks, and then I can then obviously cut it out. So I can just email somebody, they'll then cut this, and I get it back in a box a couple of days later. So, you know, it makes making cool stuff super easy, and it's super groovy. And when I can have one of my own, I will, but they're very big and very, very expensive. Well, I guess another tool that I couldn't really forget, of course, are my orange gloves. Now, I actually started wearing these a long time ago. So this was actually back in the day. I went to the doctors, as you do, for a bit of a checkup, and they went, oh, you've got an awful lot of hydrocarbons in your body. And I thought, that's not very, very cool at all. So I started wearing gloves while I was working on the show, because obviously rather than getting all that horrible oil and grease into my skin, which wasn't very, very good. And then I wanted something with extra length, because you can see these ones don't stop there like most gloves. They actually go all the way to here. And I found some that were orange. We'd just come up with the idea of the kind of the logo for GreaseJunkie as being a bit orangey. It seemed perfect. So that was actually kind of a cool way to go. But so that's that. So that is definitely a very useful tool. But one other thing, which is quite useful, is a blacklight lamp. Now you can see here, we talked about this shirt the last video we did with you guys, and you can see that this t-shirt is very sexy because it's actually luminous and reflects on light. So if I was to turn the lights off, for example, look at that, magic, you can see if you happen to go to a rave, it's very groovy. How cool is that? Now that is the tool you need, right? Now my final tool, I nearly forgot, of course, is the ubiquitous penetrating fluid. Now this stuff is amazing. XEP rocks. Obviously this is a bit of a shameless advert, but frankly, if you're taking old cars apart, you need to have some way of getting your rusty squeaky nuts undone, and that is the stuff to use for that. And talking of shameless advertising, don't forget my book. That's really important. And also the t-shirt, and also the gloves, all of which are available on my website, GreaseJunkie.com. So do that, and then it makes it all worthwhile.